Abortion happens every day. Millions of people around the world will have an abortion each year. But the majority of those people will never talk about their abortion experiences. What if millions of people broke their silence and told the truth about their lives and their choices? This is Melissa Madera in Santo Domingo, República Dominicana, and you're listening to the Abortion Diary podcast. These are the stories we share.
So obviously it was a long time ago because I couldn't even remember what year. But when I was in college, I had a boyfriend. Actually, he had started being my boyfriend in high school. And even from the very beginning of that relationship, there was a lot of, I recognize now, there was a lot of silence around that. And it kind of carried over into the eventual abortion experience as well. There's a lot of silence just in that my parents were pretty strict. My mom was pretty clear that the only reason to have a boyfriend is to test out whether a boyfriend might be somebody to marry. Which kind of discouraged early boyfriends. But this boyfriend of mine, we kind of got together when he dropped out of high school, and I was trying to convince him to return to school. And he didn't return to school, but we became boyfriend, girlfriend. But in part because there was such a discouragement from my mom, and also because it was like he was not sort of either the individual or the type of person that I think people would have expected me to be with, because I was a very good student and I was going to college, and I had well-educated parents, and this guy who was a high school dropout, and like parents were kind of hardly in the picture, and whatever. People were like, that's not like who you should be dating. Anyway, we were together for a little while. Then I did a study abroad semester in my junior year of high school to Quito, which is how I learned Spanish. And he just was not interested in staying in touch at that point, hardly. And this was in the days of you had to actually send mail and hope that it might get to South America. Way back in the late 1980s. And there were no phone calls, any of that kind of stuff. So, so we pretty much were broken up and still broken up. But then we got back together, I think, around my senior year in high school, and carried into college. And I think it was during that senior year that I sort of changed my mind about premarital sex. So I had been schooled very well by my parents in sort of social context that sex should happen in marriage, and you should only ever marry one person, and very sort of conventional ideas about those things. And I just kind of came to my own conclusions that actually premarital sex was fine. And I wanted to have sex with my boyfriend. And I went to Planned Parenthood and got on the pill, and like talked to a couple of my friends about it a little bit, and was like, okay, I'm ready for this. Well, to this day, I'm very confused about why sex between us actually never happened. And at the time, I concluded that he had some kind of physical problem where he didn't get, first it was that he didn't get an erection, and then it was that he didn't ejaculate. But then over time, like, he did get an erection and he did ejaculate, but we still never actually had intercourse. And that's sort of where kind of the silence stuff comes in. I'm like, well, I'm just not supposed to talk to him about this because he'll be embarrassed. And I was kind of embarrassed, and I was like, well, I just have to like keep loving him. That's what's important. Like, I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable here. And so it was really not talked about even between the two of us. And it wasn't talked about between me and any of my friends very much. So I was kind of sexually frustrated, but, really committed to like, I love this person, so I'm just gonna like carry on not saying anything about it. And I went away to college in Pennsylvania, and he stayed in our hometown of Austin. And so it was kind of a long distance relationship, and it was pretty rocky. I mean, it wasn't like the most glorious of relationships to begin with on lots of fronts, but the distance also made it a little rough. And at the end of, summer of between my sophomore and junior years in college, there was a time I think my parents were traveling and he was over at my house, and I was home from college for the summer. I was working, and we were in my bed together, and he said to me, well, I think I'd like to try to have sex. And I was like, oh, all right, after all this time, like, tell me a little bit about this. Why are you proposing this? And like, where is this coming from? And his answer was essentially, I mean, he was almost this direct. Well, this person, Anna, at work, I'm really interested in, and I think things are like happening with her, and I want to like see if I can have sex. And Anna at work was somebody who I was also friends with and knew, and she had until recently been in a gay relationship and had often said lots of very very offensive, I guess the best way to put it, very offensive things about bisexual people. So I was like, okay, totally out of left field on lots of fronts here. And to my credit, I was like, what the fuck, man? Like, this is messed up. Like, how can you be trying to have sex with me to see if you can have sex with her? And so I was angry, I was hurt, I was confused. I was like, I can't believe this. I was like, get out of my bed, get out of my house, get out of my life, see you. And so I left and he left, and I was, very hurt and confused and upset about it. And unfortunately, unless I want to really trust the universe, we got back together on 2 or 3 occasions before like the breakup was really final. And, I guess we saw each other. And at least one of those occasions we were without clothes and rolling around. Still no sex, like no actual intercourse, no orgasm, no like anything that felt like a fulfilling sexual encounter. But there was some sperm, and I was ovulating, and I ended up getting pregnant from that encounter. And so anyway, I don't know how to summarize it. So it never occurred to me that I could be pregnant because I had never had intercourse that I thought was required in order to get pregnant. And that summer was my parents' 25th wedding anniversary, and they had planned a family trip for me and them and my brother and sister. I have an older sister and a younger brother. And the night before, so I was talking to my sister, and I was like, I haven't gotten my period, but I haven't had sex, but like, what do you think could be going on? And she was like, well, there could be all kinds of things, like this breakup with your boyfriend and this and that and the other thing. Like, one of the things you can do is just take a pregnancy test so that you have that reassurance, and sometimes that can alleviate some of this worry that you're feeling or whatever, and then you I'm sure you get your period. And I was like, yeah, I'm usually very regular, and I haven't had my period for a long time. So fortunately, I had a good friend, childhood friend, who I called her up and I was like, hey, will you go with me to the store and get a pregnancy test? And I did a pregnancy test, and it came out positive. And I was like, well, this is impossible. Like, I really didn't believe it. I thought it was just a mistake. But I was like, the whole point of doing this test was to like know that I wasn't pregnant, and it's saying I'm pregnant. Excuse me. So I went with my friend to the store. We got a different brand, paid more money for the non-generic brand because it was going to give me the accurate answer. And it came back positive again. And I was like, what the fuck? This is impossible. I've never had sex. I cannot be pregnant. But it was also, I think what was really shocking to me, even more than the positive test, was the fact that I was super sick. Like, I was so nauseous all the time, and I was just feeling horrible. And I was like, oh my God, like, I guess I really am pregnant. I don't know how this could have happened. but I am. So we were leaving the next day for this trip to England, and I pretty much could barely stay upright that whole trip. I was so sick, and I had no idea that people could be so sick when they were pregnant. So I mean, there was a lot of surprises in this experience. Number one, you can get pregnant without having intercourse, which some doctors and nurses were like, yeah, it's very rare, but it does happen. And I was like, why in all of my sex education did I never get this message from anybody? I prided myself as okay, my mom is not going to teach me, my community is not going to teach me, let me go find out what I need to know about safe sex and whatever. And I was like, I can't, I just felt really betrayed and lied to. I'm like, if there was a risk, I wish I would have known it, because I would have done something differently. And I also felt very cheated about the fact that I hadn't had the enjoyment of sex, even though I wanted to. And I was like, but I get pregnant? How wrong is the universe? And I just felt very cheated and very wronged. And then, so on that trip, first of all, I barely could eat, I guess is the best way to put it. And I was also trying to keep it from my parents that I was pregnant. I told my sister, and she kind of helped me, hide it as best as possible. But there was a time, there was really no hiding it, because I really could barely walk, much less eat. And my mom took me to a doctor in this small town in England, and she was ready to go into the appointment with me, and I was like, oh no. It was one of these moments where I was like, I just don't know what to do here. So I was like, that's okay, I'll talk to the doctor myself, and I'm an adult and I can handle this. She's like, okay. So I told the doctor I was pregnant, and I just remember feeling sorry for him because he seemed so upset about the fact that I was pregnant and didn't want to tell my mom, and I wanted to have an abortion. And anyway, that was my 20-year-old self, or however old I was then, 20, that I would feel sorry for him, as opposed to just, I'm in a rough situation and here's this professional who's able to help me, right? So he's like, well, I'll give you some anti-nausea medication. It's something that, should you decide that you do want to carry this baby to term, that it wouldn't harm them. And so you just know that you have that option if you decide to make a different choice. And I think from the very beginning, it didn't enter my mind not to have an abortion. It just felt like this seems like the only thing to do. So I rolled myself through those 2 weeks in England trying to pretend like this was the trip of a lifetime, when I could barely see straight. And I think by the end of it, I remember one night lying in bed being like, there's nothing I've hoped for more in my life or waited for more than this abortion experience, because I cannot stand this nausea. If it doesn't kill me physically, it's gonna make me insane. I just can't stand it. It has to stop. And yeah, it was really that bad. So I got back to Austin, and I was supposed to have gone to college to be an orientation advisor. And in some ways that was so lucky, because my sister was also living in Pennsylvania at the time. I was able to call the leader and say, I'm sorry, I've had an emergency. I'm not going to be able to be an orientation advisor. I told my parents I was still following through with that. Got on the plane as planned, went back to college, but instead went and stayed with my sister for that week. And so all this is obviously lead up in context to the abortion itself. But so my sister researched where in the area to get an abortion, and there was a clinic in Chester, which is a nearby town to where we were. And when we went there, I realized the night before, I was like, oh my God, there could be protesters. It never occurred to me. And that thought really was just gut-wrenching for me. I was like, I can't imagine what it will have to be like to walk into that building. And I'm Catholic. I still claim that I'm Catholic. I claim very vehemently that I am a pro-choice Catholic. But I was like, if I have to deal with actual human beings who are shouting in my face about this, it's not going to make me change my mind, but it's going to be so painful for me. But there were no protesters. But I remember the night before, I was really like kind of worked up about that. And yeah, this was in 93. So anyway, wherever we were in abortion rights and access at that moment, I can't recall exactly. So I went into this clinic with my sister and filled out a bunch of forms. It was very clinical. And I remember thinking, like, having thought ahead of time that I was going to meet the doctor who was going to perform this procedure, that I was going to talk to them about like what had happened to me. I actually haven't ever had sex, and like this has been a real shock. And but I didn't meet anybody ahead of, well, no, one person I met ahead of time who asked me, like, had I considered not having an abortion, and was I sure that I wanted to do this? And I was like, yep, I'm sure I want to do it. Haven't really considered anything else. I mean, I know that option is out there, but no, very clear about it. And that woman was actually with me during the procedure itself. But I just remember, like, from the very beginning, it was like this big brick building. Everything was so cold and clinical. And it just kind of got worse from walking in the front door. So filled out a kabillion forms, told them, no, I really want to go ahead with this abortion. They came and called me, and my sister got up to go with me, and they're like, no, I'm sorry, you need to come by yourself. And I was like, but I want her to be with me. And they're like, we don't allow anybody to be with you during the procedures. And nobody had informed me about that. It was just sort of this like, okay, so I guess I'll stay here in the waiting room. and I just realized, like, all these assumptions that I had about the various kinds of support and where I'd be getting them from were just like not there. So I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll go by myself. And we went, like, the waiting room stuff was like upstairs, and so we went downstairs. They had me change out of my clothes into like a medical robe, and then they did this to me terrible thing. Oh God, it feels terrible remembering it. All the women who were getting abortions, they put in this room together, like, I'd say longer than this room is wide, but really narrow, and these two wooden benches on either side of the room, like where we would be facing each other, and a blaring TV at the end of the wall. And so, I don't know, 10, 20 women were like all sitting in there in our medical gowns, and it was freezing cold. Everyone's like, I mean, it really felt like cattle is what it felt like. And I was just like, do I make eye contact with these women? And like everyone was essentially trying to avoid eye contact. But I was like, this is just so wrong. Like, this feels horrible. So I sat there for what seemed like a long time, and they'd come and call different people out. And man, it's a hard memory. So they came and called me and took me to, like, it was kind of like an examination table. And I had opted for local anesthetic because, again, I was just like, this just seems the right thing to do. I want to be awake for what happens to me. And they gave me a shot in my cervix, which hurt so badly. I could not believe it. It was so painful. And that was like the first really big sort of physical shock. And I was just lying there waiting for the doctor. The doctor came in. And he was like, "Hey, how you doing?" I was like, "I'm fine," you know. He's like, "Oh, I see you go to this college." I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Yeah, I went there too, you know. What dorm do you live in?" And I told him, and he was like, "Oh, yeah, I lived in this other dorm." And this other dorm that he lived in is known as, like, the place for all of, like, the drug addicts on campus. Which was sort of, it was sort of funny, and it was also fucking terrifying. I'm like, "You're about to do this procedure to me that is a really big deal. And you're acting like it's no big deal. And the one thing that I know about you is that you lived in this dorm. And on my college, that, like, I wouldn't even want to eat dinner with any of those people." But mostly it was more just his attitude of, like, "I'm just here to, like, you know, draw your blood or something," kind of thing. And so, I mean, I don't remember everything that happened, but they kept telling me I had to relax and that they couldn't do what they needed to do if I didn't relax. And I couldn't relax. And, like, even when they put the speculum in, like, I think besides, I don't know, like, maybe I'd had a pelvic exam, like, maybe 3 times by that point. I'd never had sex, and it was just, like, rough and horrible, and it just was like, "Oh my God, this is so painful." So they kept telling me to relax, and, like, relax my butt especially. And I was in so much pain, I could barely do it, but I was like, I have to relax. And I didn't really know it at the time. It was only, like, after years of, like, talking to people and going through therapy and stuff, they didn't give me enough anesthesia. And so I could feel what was happening. And it hurt so bad. I thought I would die. I couldn't stand it. And I didn't lose consciousness, and I don't think I screamed or anything, but I just was, like, out of my head in pain. And I was holding this woman's hand, the woman who had checked me in, and I'm glad she was there. I'm glad I had somebody next to me, but it's not somebody who I knew. It was so horrible. It was, like, the most horrible physical feeling I can ever imagine. And it felt like it went on forever. And, like, okay, now we're doing this. Now we're doing that. Okay, all right. Well, now I think we're about done. And I remember when I finally sat up, like, there was this one big drop of blood on the floor. And, like, just visually, I was like, that's, like, my only sort of external sign of what has just happened to me and what has just happened to my body. So they gave me a, big maxi pad, and they're like, "Okay, come over here, this recovery room." And it was, like, this tiny little room, and they're like, here's some juice. And mostly, I mean, it's just, this is all just, like, stuff I've had to work through in my adult life. Like, in the recovery room, I was so worried about telling my sister that I was okay. Like, I just wanted to let her know I was okay. And there was no way for me to do that unless I told them that I was ready to go. And I wasn't ready to go, but I so wanted to see her. So as soon as I felt like I wasn't gonna for sure faint, I was like, okay, I'm ready. I want to go. And I went and I saw my sister, and I did, like, I was just like, okay, let's go. And we went home to her apartment, and I think I had a nap and had something to eat. And it was that night I called my ex-boyfriend, which I wish for lots of reasons I hadn't done, to tell him, like, okay. Oh, and I skipped the whole part of, like, telling him I was pregnant. To this day, I don't know if he believes that I was or not. But anyway, it's not really that important. So I called him and told him, I had the abortion. It's fine. I'm fine. And he used that very lovely opportunity to tell me that he was actually having sex with Anna. And things were going great. I don't know, maybe I'm glad he did that, because it was so fucking ridiculous. I was like, if I had entertained any possibility of ever, like, seeing you again in my life, like, it's gone now. I'm like, you motherfucker, like, shut up, go to hell, goodbye, click. But it was so painful, because that whole breakup was like, I was still in love with him. I still wanted to be with him. He was just an asshole. So I had to break up with him. But really talk about messing me up psychologically. Just like, first of all, okay, I'm pregnant, never had intercourse. Or first wanted to have sex, didn't have sex. Then got pregnant without having had sex. Then had this horrible abortion experience, and then had him tell me, like, I'm screwing somebody else even though I never screwed you. And so, like, all this internalized stuff of, like, well, why didn't that ever happen with me? Like, was I ugly? Was I disgusting? Were you scared my dad was going to shoot you? Like, I don't know why, whatever. Or I think more kind of the most prominent thing was, like, somehow Anna is older, sexier, more sexually whatever, experience, just to, like, whatever. And so you want to have sex with her, and you'd never really wanted to have sex with me, and so we didn't. I think that's kind of where my mind went on the subconscious level. The next day, I mean, yeah, I don't think that my sister kind of did sort of what she should have to take care of me, but she didn't know any better, and she sort of did what she knew how to do, and I'm so grateful for those things. But kind of like me, she's like, well, the literature says that you should be fine to resume normal activities, so let's take the bus to the mall and we'll go shopping. I need some new, like, glasses or cutlery or something for my kitchen. Let's go to the mall. And I'm like, okay. I was kind of in this like, just mental shock, physical shock kind of days. And so we got on the bus and we went to the mall, and I remember just feeling like, I am not feeling the shopping trip. Like, I don't know what I should be doing, but this is not really fun for me. And I do remember one time, like, going, like, on an escalator bank and coming around a corner and seeing, like, the lingerie section in a department store. And man, it hit me just like a ton of bricks. I'm like all of that is gone. Like, any kind of excitement or attraction, or, like, I want to explore things sexually, like, I just feel like it's just been ripped away from me. And so at some point I was like, I think we should go home. Let's go home. I remember sitting on the bus and just like, oh my God, I am so going to throw up. I'm just going to throw up. I'm going to throw up all over everybody, like, a million times. I didn't throw up. But then, within a matter of days, I was back at college and starting the new semester. And it just, like, I remember feeling like just certain expectations of, like, okay, this happened. They say I'm supposed to resume my normal activities, call them if I have a fever or whatever, if I'm hemorrhaging, and none of those things was happening. So I'm like, I guess I'm fine, but I don't really feel fine. And one thing that was really tough is that I did keep bleeding for, I don't know, maybe 2 months. And I called the clinic on a couple of different occasions, and I'm like, supposedly this was supposed to have stopped and it's continuing. And they're like, well, how heavy is the bleeding? Like, do you soak through a maxi pad every 15 minutes? And or whatever the questions were. And I'm like, no, but I'm bleeding like every day. Like, and so I just felt like every time I went to the bathroom, I had this visual reminder with the blood of like, your body is still like coping with this. And they're like, no, it's fine. Are you running a fever? I'm like, no. And it was like, I just felt like I was looking for somebody to tell me like, you're not okay. Like there's something, like I was looking to my physical symptoms to be proof that I wasn't okay. Because internally I could feel that I was not okay, but I didn't know how to justify that or claim it or whatever. So I think I was living in a quad that year. So I shared a bedroom with one person who I'd lived with the year before. And then a couple of other people in the other room. And so I told the person who I was sharing the room with, and I remember I kind of justified it by being like, you know, should anything physical happen to me and I need to like go to the emergency room or something, I want you to know that like I just had an abortion. And she's like, okay, you know. And then I had a friend, another childhood friend who I had told what happened, and she was like, you know, I really encourage you to go like see a therapist and just kind of make sure that you're okay. And so I followed that advice more because I was kind of following advice than I really felt like there was something I needed. And unfortunately I don't want to say that it was because she was an intern, but the person I was seeing was not especially helpful. And for whatever reason, she seemed to think that me sorting out all of my stuff with my mom and my relationship with my mom needed a lot of attention, not this abortion that I just had. And my mom and my relationship with my mom did need a lot of attention. It just wasn't what was most needed right then. And it's funny. I think maybe 2 years later, maybe not even that much, like things really kind of blew up on our campus about the psychological services because people had had such bad experiences with them, and the director was fired and all this kind of stuff. And there was one time where, like, even though I was seeing this therapist regularly, I was walking across campus, and I had this sensation for months of, I just can't keep walking. I'm going to fall down. Like, and it really felt kind of like times where I have done big hikes or like gone mountain climbing or whatever, where it's like, I'm almost there. I just have to keep going. I mean, so daily I'm walking around campus, like, I just have to keep going. I just have to like take a few more steps to get to the class or to get to the dining hall or to get back to the dorm room. And I just have to keep going. And I remember I was walking across campus, and it was, there was like a pile of leaves on the ground. And I was like, I think I'm actually going to fall down in that pile of leaves. And it was such a strong and weird sensation. Like I could just see it was about to happen. I was like, I got to get myself, like redirect myself to this psychological services area. And so I walked in there like, are you having an emergency? And I'm like, I don't know. I think so. I guess so. So I actually saw the director of the psychological services that time. Like when I walked in, I was like, I have to talk to somebody. The guy was so horrible. I left there. I mean, again, maybe it was a blessing in disguise. I'm like, okay, I'm totally fine. Like I'm saying, that guy is like, he's a crackpot. Like he needs help, and I'm okay. So I'll keep going. I was like, what do I say to him? Yes, I had this abortion, but I think I'm doing okay. But I just saw this pile of leaves and I thought I was going to fall into it and not be able to get up. Like, it's like all this stuff I just didn't know how to cope with. And I wish that some of the people along the way might have been better equipped to cope with it. So I think over the following months, there were a few other people that were close to me that I confided in. And then my husband, who was then my boyfriend, and we got together kind of a few months after that. When our relationship was first starting, I felt very strongly that I wanted to tell him that I'd had this abortion. And he was like, okay. I mean, I think he recognized that it was really important to me. And he was like, but I mean, since then he's been like, but I didn't know why. Like, I knew it was a big deal to you. I knew you really wanted to tell me, but I didn't really get why that was the case. But yeah, I just had I felt very compelled to tell him. And part of me feels like I wanted to know that I wasn't going to be judged in any way, but I also knew that I was still healing from that. And I wanted that to be something that could be present as our relationship was starting. So in some ways I feel like that was a good impulse on my part. But I also was really screwed up, like mentally, physically, sexually, like it was just a big mess. And, it was a rough start to our relationship. So that was a little bit hard. So, and I think over the years, different things have happened where I'm like, okay, this needs to be revisited again. Let me go, talk to a therapist about it. Let me do something different, and sharing the story with you is part of that. And, there's some things kind of in recent life that kind of brought it all back. And there's a therapist who I'm working with right now when I was talking to her about some things, she was like, oh, it is really clear to me that the pregnancy and birth of your second child really brought, because of some things around that experience, really brought back the PTSD that you had from the abortion. And I was like, okay, stranger things have happened to me. So who's to say that it, even in spite of therapy and in spite of this and that over the last, 22 years, it wouldn't still come back to be, a big deal and need some attention again in a different kind of a way. So I feel like it took me a long time to be able to start sharing, even to be able to say to somebody, I had an abortion, was really hard to do initially. And I felt like I did it initially with a few close friends because I felt like I had to, somebody needed to know, and I needed to share it with people a little bit. And then over the subsequent years, I would tell more of the story, or I would tell more people. But I think it also with the experience of having now had 2 children and the experiences of those pregnancies and the conversations that I have with women, I guess I feel like the landscape of, I guess you would call them reproductive issues, it's all part of it. So all of the stuff that I felt like I couldn't share or didn't know or was ill-informed about, or the people who were trying to help me didn't really know how to help me, all of that is part of the silence around reproduction and around women and their bodies and their sexuality. And so I just feel like that pregnancy and abortion experience, and just my absolute shock at, number one, I'm pregnant, and number 2, I can be this sick, I can't walk and I can't eat. I never heard about that. The only thing I'd ever heard from my mom was oh, isn't pregnancy wonderful? Don't you just feel like it's the best thing in the world? And that was what I thought pregnancy was like. So I'm and now again, having had 2 kids and having known a lot of women who have had children or who have been pregnant, I'm it is not is far from uncommon to be that sick, you know? I mean, yes, there's a spectrum. Some people aren't sick at all, and some people like have to be checked into the hospital for 9 months, right? And there's everything in between. But like, I just didn't know that that kind of nausea was possible. And so, yeah, I just feel like, and like sharing with women about pregnancies and miscarriages and abortions and labor and delivery of children. And yeah, I'm just like, I don't think I ever had a friend talk to me about either an abortion experience or a miscarriage experience until after I started talking with people and being like, I had an abortion, or I'm trying to get pregnant, or you know, this is what my pregnancy is like, that other people would sort of respond and say, oh, well, yeah, I had an abortion too, or I miscarried, you know, 3 different times before this pregnancy, or things like that. So, and the experiences, so I've never had a miscarriage, but my friends who have, I mean, obviously it's different, but I think the kind of shock of what their bodies and their psyches go through with miscarriages in some cases have been really, really extreme. And they're like, I didn't know that this is what was going to happen. Everyone was saying like it was fine, it was normal, but like, you know, there was so much blood, I thought for sure I was about to die. Like, and you know, and a lot of, I don't know what this like reality is in terms of numbers, but it just seems like at least as many women who have abortions also have miscarriages. And so all this population of like really significant experiences that women have that just don't get shared very much at all seems really, I mean, what does it seem like? It just hurts people. And so part of my interactions just with people who I meet and who I know is to be like, try to make it a space where people will talk to me about things, and to be willing to share some of my experiences and my knowledge with people, so that there's just not that sense of like, I have to cope with it myself. So I think that's pretty much the story.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Oh, and there's kind of a PS to the story. I mean, there's lots of PSs, but one thing that came really years and years after the experience was the realization that my mom knew I was pregnant. And so there was that thing about the doctor's office that I told you about. And so I think she kind of maybe suspected at that point, but then when we got back to Texas before I went to before I went to Pennsylvania, the last day that I was in town, she was like, okay, well, before you go back to college, what would you like for dinner for your last meal? And I remember I said I'd like chicken fajitas and cornbread, which would have been a completely normal thing to ask for. And she goes, that's a really strange request. Are you pregnant? And I said, no. And I just kind of like put that memory like way in the back of my head somewhere, and it only came out after a lot of therapy. And, you know, to her, like even telling that story initially to my therapist, we talk about denial, right? I like my mom's denial and my own denial, like it didn't hit me that she knew until my therapist was like, it sure seems to me like your mom knew you were pregnant. And I'm like, oh yeah. Like, thank you for putting 2 and 2 together for me to come up with the fact that 4 is the answer. And so, and I think it was a hard thing to kind of look at and be like, so my mom knew, didn't want to confess that she knew, didn't want to deal with the situation, and just kind of left me high and dry to deal with it. So, I mean, that was hard to stomach, but I would say having become a mother myself, that put a whole other layer on it, because I was like, I cannot imagine doing that to my daughter. And my mom is my mom, and she has her history and her ghosts and her whatever, but it's really kind of hard for me to imagine what would have, I don't know, making that choice, right? To just even suspect that my daughter was pregnant, much less know she was pregnant, and being like, unless you're going to confess it to me and force me to have to deal with it, I'm going to pretend I don't see it. So that's, it's certainly been painful to deal with. But, there it is.
Have you ever talked about your abortion with her?
Mm-mm. Nope. And I don't really have any desire to. I mean, kind of in a fantasy land, I do. Like, oh, I'd love to have been able to go to my mom in the first place and told her what happened and get her support. And I think initially that had been my first impulse. I'm like, oh, well, here's a tough situation I'm in. Like, I should go to mom and dad, and I know they're not going to be happy about this, but, like, I think they'll support me. And my sister was like, maybe you want to think twice about that. I was like, okay. So, and I mean, I don't see how talking to her about it now would help me. I think it would just bring up all of the grief and worst parts of that whole experience. So I could be wrong, and who knows, maybe in the future I might feel differently about it, but right now I'm just like, that just seems like it would only make things worse. Like, all the bad things, it would make all the bad things worse, and it wouldn't help any of the stuff that kind of needs healing in good ways. So it's a lot easier to share it with other people.
Have you ever revisited it with your sister?
No. Mm-mm. I mean, we've like referenced it. It's not like it's not talked about, but we haven't really talked about the experience or memories of it. With my couple of childhood friends who knew about it when it was happening, we have, but yeah, not my sister.
Have you ever thought about revisiting it with her?
Nope, I haven't. I'm obviously thinking about it now. We're not very close, is kind of one thing else I'll say. Like, I don't know, adult sibling relationships seem very difficult. She just lives a very different life than I do. And I don't know. I think I'll just have to. We don't talk to each other very often. It's not like there's contention or anything, but yeah, we hardly talk to each other much anyway. So it just doesn't kind of naturally feel like, as I'm not sharing with her much about any of the big things and other big things in my life. Why would I necessarily talk to her about this and my revisiting the experiences and that type of thing? But it's worth thinking about.
I have one more question. You said that your therapist said that your PTSD came back up with your second pregnancy or your birth.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little bit about that, or what that means for you?
Yeah. So, I think that it's part of what has helped make it clear for me that like what I was saying earlier about like abortions and miscarriages and pregnancy and birth are all part of the same package. Because when I was pregnant with my second child, well, I guess, I don't know, let me think about what I want to share about that, because it's much more present than in the past. But I guess, a couple of things. One is that with my first pregnancy, I had some morning sickness and nausea and everything, but it was not nearly as bad as with that first pregnancy. And I very much wanted to be having a baby and was really excited about it. So it was all kind of, and I had learned a lot about pregnancy and what to expect that I hadn't known initially. So, but I had a lot more nausea and just a much harder pregnancy with my second child. That was part of it. And then also the question came up of whether or not we were going to do like genetic testing ahead of time to see if the baby or the fetus was okay. And that was something that caught me off guard because we hadn't really done that with our first child. And I just went straight into this pit, I guess is the best way to put it, which was, if we do the testing and if the baby has lots of abnormalities, and if we decide that either financially we're never going to be able to sustain this child, or it's not going to survive, or its quality of life is going to be so bad, if any of those things, or if like my husband feels like he wants to terminate the pregnancy but I don't want to, and if then, like, the only thing that mattered was the end point, then I might have to have another abortion. And that was, like I said, it just felt like a pit. And my adult rational brain was like in some little corner saying, like, all of these ifs like need their own attention, right? It's not a done deal. It's not that you're in a relationship with somebody who's going to like force you to have an abortion, like the furthest thing from it. But I couldn't engage with that rationality. I could only engage with the panic, like the absolute panic of, what if I have to go through this again? And I think being in where I am in my life, in the relationship that I'm in, and we had wanted to have the second child and everything, it felt like I was blindsided all over again, of like, I never thought that I was going to have to look at this possibility again, but here it is. And I am pregnant, and this fetus could be completely healthy and fine, and it could have extreme disabilities. And so, I mean, it was kind of, depending on how you want to characterize it, like I had my first child when I was 36 and my second child when I was 40. And so it just kind of the knowledge and the statistics about like increased risk for Down syndrome and other things like that. So yeah, I was just like, oh my God, I never thought I was going to have to think about the possibility of having an abortion again. And it brought up all of those memories. And I didn't really cope with it very well. I guess it's the best way to put it. So, fortunately, I mean, we did the genetic testing. Everything came back fine. Baby was and is completely healthy. And with both my kids, I had really good labor and delivery experiences. And I'm really thankful for those. I'm really thankful to myself and to my spouse and to doulas in particular, who really helped both of those experiences go really well. And not, I guess I just feel like physically and psychically and emotionally, all of that could be very tied up with my abortion experience. And I really feel like, as much as possible, they were untangled from each other. Yes, they're related, but I didn't feel like those experiences were ones where, like, oh my gosh, all I can think about is like having gone through this other experience and what meaning I make of that and what my body remembers of it, so that I can't have a good pregnancy, labor, delivery. So I'm really glad to have had those really positive labor delivery experiences.
But so what happened when you told your boyfriend that you were pregnant?
Oh, yeah. So, man, he's a motherfucker. Literally and figuratively. Okay, so he was in this bakery that he was working in with Anna, who he was in love with. I had told him that I needed to see him, and that I was going to be leaving town, going back to college soon, and we had broken up. And he was kind of reluctant to just like, well, I don't know, maybe we can get together here or there. Why do you need to see me? Like, you know, we're broken up. I was like, well, I have something important I need to tell you. So long and short of it was, he kind of forced it that I come and talk to him at work. And he was working in a bakery and like doing the actual baking. So he was like in the kitchen. So I remember like standing in this bakery kitchen while he was doing his work and like leaning against this table waiting for him. And he's like, so what do you need to tell me? And I was like, I'm not going to talk to you here. Like, can you take a break? Well, no, it's not really my break time. I'm like, well, I need to talk to you and you need to take a break. So anyone who's ever worked in any kind of food service knows what the break area is like, which is filthy and dirty and disgusting, and like you always want to like leave as quickly as you can. So I remember sitting on this little picnic bench outside the back of the kitchen, and I was like, look, I just want to let you know I'm pregnant, and I know it's kind of strange because we never had sex, but I am pregnant, and I'm gonna have an abortion, and I'd like you to pay for half of it, and I'll be in touch. And he was like, wow, okay, well, I didn't expect you were going to say that. That's the only thing I remember him saying. And I think I was like, well, and I never expected I was going to be pregnant, so fuck you, bye. And then he and my brother were kind of friends, and so my brother sort of was the go-between for delivering some cash to me, and I got a little from him initially, and then I had to ask him for the rest of it, and it just was like, it's only fair that you pay for half of it. And I mean, that's just kind of where my brain was at the time. And so I was like, hey, to my brother, tell him he needs to pay up. He owes me some money, and next, you know, he needs to give it to you, and next time you see me, you can give it to me. And he did. He eventually paid for his half.
Did your brother know what the money was for?
I don't think so, but I did tell my brother. I just think I told him after the money had been delivered at some point. I mean, not that those things were connected, but I think I shared with him that I'd had an abortion and kind of everything around it kind of a while later. Yeah. And one thing I'll comment on, I'm just kind of realizing this now, is that when I first started sharing my story with people, I couldn't do it without shivering really, really severely. And I'd literally have to go and get like a billion blankets and wrap them around me to be able to speak, because I'd get so shivery. And that's obviously not the case now. I'm sitting here in like regular clothes. So that, I mean, I just feel like it just is kind of getting better over time. The more therapists, the more friends, the like more kind of progress. But some of those during my pregnancy with my second child, there were times where that same physical sensation was coming back, particularly around sex and sexuality. And so, I mean, it took me a while to realize, like, oh, this like uncontrollable shivering thing, like I'm about to freeze to death feeling, it's connected. Like my body is telling me something that, like, what's going on with you right now is related to what was going on with you 20 years ago. So
why do you want to share your story?
Well, I think because I really want to be healed, and I really want to be free, And I really want to have my body and my sexuality and my history of those things not kind of weigh down my current life. And I think there's lots of things. I also want to be able to say clearly, I'm Catholic and I absolutely believe that women have a right to an abortion. And then just kind of outside the specific religious context, I'm like, all women all over the world, like, there's not anywhere near enough sort of talking and sharing about experiences, and it really hurts people in so many ways. And so I just, want to do something that I can as an individual to shift that. I think the more I share my story, the more it helps me, because it just externalizes it instead of internalizes it. And I make different sense of it and notice different things about how I make sense of it, or what I remember, or what I forget, or what's important every time I tell the story. So this is its current version. I think when it first happened, it was like, I had an abortion was about all I could say, or I had an abortion last month, or I had an abortion last year, and I never had sex. Like, that was a really big deal to me for a long time. Like, but yeah, just kind of recognizing, not to normalize that, but I'm like, every single woman who has an abortion has some version of, I didn't think this could happen, or I didn't think this would happen, or I was always scared this was going to happen. Everyone's going through some version of the shock of that reality. And so in that regard, my experience was absolutely not unique. It's just at the time I felt that it was, because I was like, I'm the one Virgin Mary besides the Virgin Mary. But apparently I'm not. There's others. There are others. Because doctors and nurses told me, yeah, it's rare, but it does happen. If the sperm is close enough, it can kind of find its way. So yeah. So for a long time I was going around being like a public service announcement for everyone I knew. I'm like, if there's any penis anywhere that might leak any sperm anywhere in the vicinity of your vagina, put a condom on it. People are like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, no, really, like, use a condom all the time. Like, it's good advice anyway for STDs. I'm like, but I was like really focused on the pregnancy part. You didn't know you could get pregnant, but you can. So.
And I think you mentioned a little bit about like working through it over the past 22 years. Like, what have you done to help work through that, through the experience?
Yeah. So I think probably chief among that is therapy. Every time, well, I shouldn't say every time, but I've gone through different periods of individual therapy and couples therapy. And a lot of times that has restarted because of something that is related directly or indirectly to this experience. That's the biggest one. Well, and then I would also say just talking to people. So whether sometimes it's emailing, like I have a couple of young women who I know who have come to me like confiding in me about things having to do with sex. And so I actually haven't talked with them specifically about my abortion experience, but just talking about sex and sexuality in general. And and those are people who don't live here, so that's usually like emailing or chatting or whatever. But talking with people in person is really helpful. And even like I was thinking, did I want to tell this story anonymously, or maybe not tell it at all because I haven't talked to my parents about the story? But as much as I'm caught in the 20th century with my technology, they're caught in the 19th century, so possibilities of them hearing a podcast are pretty slim. And I'm like, and if it does happen, I'm like, it's not the end of the world. Like, if my mom listens to this and she's like, I mean, she didn't address the pregnancy the first time. She can pretend she never heard the story if she wants to. So, but I think it's very unlikely that they would hear this story.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Just gratitude. I mean, I remember when I read and heard about the project, I was like, that's right. That is so needed. And I'm so glad somebody is making it their project to do this. And when I think about it, I'm like, I mean, I have no idea how many stories you have listened to, but you've posted at least 100, so it's been at least 100. So, like, that is a lot of listening to people's stories, and like very, I mean, there's a range, you know, some are like, yeah, I had an abortion and blah, blah, blah. And some are really, really painful. Like, particularly one that I listened to that stuck with me was the woman who I think is in her 50s who had 2 abortions when she was 13 and 17, I think.
Karen.
Yeah. And anyway, so I just like all of those stories that you have willingly opened yourself up to hearing, like I really appreciate that a lot. And it's a really important project, and I hope, I just hope it can continue, and I hope if you want it to be your life's work that you can find a way financially to make that happen. I really hope that is the case, and if it's not your life's work but it's a side project or whatever, that it can continue, and that other women can, and men also, can recognize how important it is for people to be able to share what has happened to them and what is happening to them, just so that people can really be healthy and free people in the world.
As always, for more information about the Abortion Diary podcast, visit us on the web at theabortiondiary.com or email me with your questions or comments. If you would like to share your story, send me an email at melissa@theabortiondiary.com or visit our website, click on Share Your Abortion Story, and fill out our contact form. If you're a fan of the podcast and would like to help us reach more folks, please subscribe on iTunes and write a review or rate this podcast. Your reviews and ratings will help us grow in the iTunes rankings and reach more people. I would also love to hear from you. You can also follow the Abortion Diary on Twitter or Facebook. And the Abortion Diary can't continue without your support. Support the Abortion Diary by making a tax-deductible donation to us on Fractured Atlas, or buying some of our wristbands or totes on Store Envy. And a special thanks to you for listening. I'll be back next week with a new story.